when I first got into healthcare policy, I was working in the White House, I was working in the Senate. We were adding prescription drugs to Medicare. We were working on the global AIDS bill. And then in 2014, I got into the longevity space, which was quite early. And by 2015, we already had launched Global Healthspan Policy Institute. And at that time, our routine consisted of, it was all about metformin. So Nir Barzilai was telling us all about metformin, and we were working on raising money for that FDA clinical trial. And Walter Longo, intermittent fasting, and the fasting mimicking diet, they were the two hot things in 2015. So of course I got deep into intermittent fasting and into Prolong. You might have heard of Prolong. It's Walter Longo's fasting mimicking diet for 5 days where you can eat and have nutrition for your body, but your body thinks it's starving. And so it cleans out all the senescent cells and stimulates your stem cells. So that was the core part of my routine in 2015. And then we started doing a lot of research looking at what was already known, and AI was just coming online, but it was more kind of manual at that time. I would say that in the last 2 or 3 years, the amount of information has just gone through the roof. So like the first 5 or 6 years, I would just go to longevity conferences and we would be talking about the length of telomeres, and we would be talking about senescent cells and things like that. But now I mainly go to the conferences where everything, the science has been translated into what we can do here and now. So I joined the Institute of Functional Medicine. They have a big conference every year, kind of Memorial Day weekend. This year it's going to be in San Diego. I'll be there. I joined the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, and they have a fantastic conference in Las Vegas every year in December. I joined, there's another conference in New York that's in February every year. It's Integrated Healthcare Conference. That's fantastic. And then my new favorite, they didn't have a conference for several years because of COVID, but they're back going strong. And it's called IMMH, Integrative Medicine for Mental Health. So that covers everything from anxiety to dementia to bipolar to schizophrenia to autism, you name it, addictions, all kind of addictions. And they had a wonderful conference in Washington, D.C. in October. So my favorite thing is to go to these 4 entities conferences every year, talk to every vendor 4 or 5 times. Then I stay up going through all their materials, and the next day I go back to the booths that have very promising information, whether it's testing, which is a favorite, or some of the wearables or the gadgets, or hyperbaric oxygen chamber, which I have one at home now. Yeah. Kind of like the NBA players and the football players, they have them also. I don't
Same
sleep
as
in mine though.
I mean, it's, hyperbaric chambers, red light saunas, and cold plunges. A lot of these things that seem like they used to be sort of out of reach are now accessible, and we can put them in our home. We have a red light sauna in our home here. So it's wild to me that a lot of this stuff that used to seem so far out there or only accessible to a certain amount of people, the world has really flattened, and we all are now able to access this, and we have the access to the knowledge as to why we're using it and to how it's beneficial for us, both physically and, you touched on it, within our mental health scope as well.
Yes.
So when you go to a lot of these conferences, you're speaking, you're engaging at, again, these what seems like very high level conversations. How do you approach educating policymakers, decision makers? How are you influencing, I guess, about the importance of longevity research and the impacts that it has on society, like all the way down, to the general public again, for our readers, at the Live Long newsletter, for the people who might be attending the conference for a first time, how are you, like I said, kind of approaching the education standpoint of like, this is very important and this is why we need funding for these things. What's your approach there?
Yes. Well, since we're a public charity, we do mostly education. We spend most of our time over with the decision makers. So that would be senators, congressmen, members of parliament. So we mainly focus on Europe and the United States and a few other countries in Asia and Australia and Chile. Israel, of course, that's where most of the action is. So we do behind closed door briefings. Usually, these decision makers don't want people to know that they don't know all these things. So it's quite private. That works
Hmm.
better. And myself and other staff will brief them, but we also bring in experts, PhDs, MDs, people who are leaders in the field. And we will bring them in for like 2 days into DC and we'll do the rounds. We'll have meetings set up with the congressmen and senators and their staff. And most importantly, the important committees and the high level staff on the committees, also over to the executive branch. I remember one of the very first briefings we did in 2015, and I know we had Nero Barzilai and a couple other high-end researchers, like David Sinclair, people like that. And we were doing a meeting at CMS and we were talking to some doctors with Medicare. And they were like, what? Aging? You can't control aging. You can't manipulate aging. You can't slow it down. What are you talking about? It's
Yes, you can.
natural. It's something that happens naturally. And so we had to, get off the chalkboard and educate them. And then we moved over to the House and the Senate. And so we're particularly effective when there are relevant hearings, like, for example, hearings for funding for NIA within NIH, where they do get
What
most of
what
the
what is
money,
it? Sorry, what is NIA
is the National Institute for Aging
and the
within
NIH
the
National
National
Institute?
Institute for Health,
Okay.
which is where the lion's share of all the money for research in the world is. It's
Hmm.
right there. So we're very protective of that particular division of NIH and making sure that their funding is not cut and hopefully that there's an increase.
What do you see as sort of the biggest obstacles in presenting in these advancements? I mean, I imagine that there are wildly different obstacles both in the United States and then in Europe. I mean, I just knowing even a little bit about the nutrition and then health and the FDA and things as it relates to food within Europe and the United States. What do you see as some of the biggest obstacles in preventing advancements in longevity and in aging research and medicine?
Well, I would say on the funding side, as far as governments, they are really concerned about the researchers developing something that's going to all of a sudden add 5 years to everybody's life, and that would bankrupt every country on the planet because of Social Security and retirement. They would and they would have to go and change the laws, and that's the third rail, and they would be voted out of office. So that's a big concern for them.
Edwina,
That's why we
that is huge. That is a
it,
huge statement,
Yeah, well,
and not.
it's true, yes. So that's why we use the term health span. We're really focused on extending the time period that people are healthy before they die, and not so much extending just additional years, because often those are unhealthy years, and there's not much quality of life there. So we're focused on the chronic conditions. And all the chronic conditions that are out there, the big 14 or so, everything from diabetes to dementia to stroke to heart disease to arthritis, they are caused by 5,000% aging.
Yeah.
And so if you can slow down that underlying cause and manipulate it and control it a little bit better, you could save trillions of dollars for governments instead of costing them trillions of dollars in retirement. and then people could live healthy longer and be productive. So that's our big focus. So that concept is a big obstacle. So most of the money for the research that needs to be done is mainly coming from government still at this point. When we hear about the billionaires that are putting some money in here and there in Google and others, and Elon Musk, I've met with him at SpaceX and in his private dining room. And they're interested, for themselves personally, more so than anything else. But that's not really where the big money is coming from. I mean, they don't want to pay for basic biology, cellular research that might take years before you have any good results.
Yeah, I mean that would be my next question is what is the timeline or the duration between these conversations now, and I guess how far out are you looking to see results from the work that we're doing today? The conversations that you're having, the policies that are being implemented, is that 5 years down the road? Is that 10 years down the road? I mean, this seems like such a much longer timeline than, being able to lower my cholesterol in the next 3 months by eating, less fat. Like, what
Mhm.
is that timeline from discussions and conversations to actual policy implementation?
Well, things can move really quickly. Like, for example, with Obamacare, that moved really quickly. It didn't take that long, and that was a piece of legislation I worked on, and there was a lot of good success that came out of that. The Affordable Care Act is its technical term. Uh, and so I've seen it go quickly. Things go better if you have a big coalition. We have not had tremendous success in building a big, powerful coalition where you get all the physician groups on board and the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the hospitals and the consumer groups. We haven't been able to build those types of coalitions like I was able to build with adding prescription drugs to Medicare or the patient-centered medical home or some of these other or electronic medical records. We were able to build a big national and international coalition around those concepts. But yes, this has been slower to take off. But I would say that our best hope at the moment is over with the functional medicine. Do you know much about functional medicine,
Um,
integrative healthcare?
uh, High level, but please enlighten.
Yes. Well, so we have kind of the traditional medicine in the US, and then we have these few people that practice functional medicine. And they get to the root cause of whatever your health problem is. They will spend hours with you. They, uh, they focus on food first. If anything can be fixed by your diet or food, they restore your gut. They look at the environmental toxins that you've been exposed to that are in your body. They help you detox because I think probably in the future, a very important survival of the fittest technique will be limiting your exposure to environmental toxins. That's going to be a key issue because of the plastics and the glyphosate and the pesticides and the molds and the heavy metals. It's everywhere and it's killing us. Air pollution, water that is not clean. So they focus on those things. So I'm with quite a lot of the functional medicine doctors in their groups. Like I'm with Mark Hyman, the Ultra Wellness Center in Lenox, Massachusetts. So I go there. I follow their advice. He has a company called Function Health where you can get 100 labs for $500. It's actually 160. You get 100 labs, and then 6 months later, you get 60 more labs for just $500 a year. He has Levels, which is the company that has the glucose monitor that I'm wearing on my arm. And there was a
That's
dietitian,
that.
or
Sorry, that's made by Levels.
it's called Levels, yes, and
Levels.
it's still
Okay.
kind of it's like in the beta form right now, and you get all kinds of feedback. There's a nutritionist looking at what you're eating and what you're doing, and if you have a spike, and they're like, "Oh, look, you just had pasta. You shouldn't have started with the pasta. You should have had your protein first." and then you could have had some pasta and you wouldn't have had a spike. So those companies are wonderful and they can be quite reasonable. Can you imagine getting 160 blood tests for only $500 a year? There's
Right.
another company called Mito that's doing something quite similar. The more the merrier.
As this science progresses, how do we or how can we sort of ensure access and equity across populations? You know, a $500 lab is not within reach for every single person in the country right now. But the idea of being able to test for that or to have that knowledge, that seems like something we should all be able to have access to. I mean, and health should be democratized across the board. You know, everyone wants to be healthier for a longer period of time. I guess how can we sort of ensure and work towards that as a United States community, as a global community, as someone in your position?
Yes, that's something that we think about and talk about a lot. So that's an excellent question. Thank you for that question. Um, well, so I would say in the U.S., which is very different, say like a place like France, because France they're already a little bit more in the functional health medicine type arena where the physician will sit down with you and talk about the whole person and do the testing that they need, and it's covered by the federal government insurance. But in the US, since at the moment, this type of medicine, this integrative medicine, this functional medicine that doesn't have to be expensive, is not covered by insurance, unfortunately. But you can get it inexpensively, and I can tell you how to get it now inexpensively. So in just about every neighborhood, there's going to be somebody who does functional or integrative health. You can go to the Institute of Functional Medicine. You can look at their website. You don't have to pay anything. And they have a map and they tell you these people that are trained and certified in functional medicine. And you can go to them and you just pay for their time. Sometimes they might just charge $100 or $200, a small amount of money. They'll use your insurance card for all the labs. Like, for example, I went to a functional medicine doctor in Birmingham, Alabama. I think I paid $150 for the doctor. And they took the Quest or LabCorp sheet. They checked every box on that sheet because I had some weird symptoms that was going on, and I'd been to Johns Hopkins, I'd been to Cleveland Clinic. Nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And so since they don't take insurance, they can they can run every blood test on your insurance and not be dropped by the insurance company or scolded or not sharing into the profits. And then I found out I had Lyme disease and that all the problems that I had been experiencing for a number of years was because of Lyme disease. And in Washington, D.C., we have an extremely high rate of Lyme disease, the highest in the world in the mid-Atlantic. So Pennsylvania, Maryland, and D.C. and Virginia.
And that was all the result of of functional health.
Yes, even though I had been to Johns Hopkins, even though I'd been to Cleveland Clinic, I'd been to a lot of doctors. No one figured out my weird symptoms and what was wrong. And I just rolled into one small functional health clinic and a nurse practitioner. And it was a physician associate, and they're great. Physician associates, nurse practitioners are fantastic. Working under a doctor that was up in Huntsville, Alabama. And within 3 or 4 days, the CDC was looking for me, the county health department was looking for me, the owner of the clinic was looking for me, the physician associate was looking for me because I tested so positive for like so many strands of Lyme disease. And I would thank you. Finally, now I know what I have, and I can now deal with it. I can get
Address,
treatment for Lyme.
yeah, address it, manage it. I mean, it seems like education plays such an important role here because then we can make educated and informed decisions both about nutrition, about physical activity, and all of those things. And so,
Mm.
well, we are coming up. We're right at about 25 minutes right now. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I would love to know where do you see longevity and the conversations, the research and the education sort of heading in the next few years? I asked this. We had a guest on the podcast recently, a gentleman named Amri Amarov Drori, PhD. He's a doctor. He works with a company called NFX Bio, and he's got a blog recently that's called The Race to 160. And they are all looking at extending that lifespan. And I think you brought up a really good points that I have certainly not heard about. Extending lifespan can be detrimental. It seems like there's some conflicting ideas there. But I wonder, where do you see this longevity conversation, research, technology? Where are we going within the next 5 and 10 years? What are you looking at as the big advancements? And what are, maybe you can brief us a little bit on some of those behind closed doors conversations as to what people are talking about.
Well, I'm with what you guys are doing. I think that it's time to take it to the consumer and take it to the people. So we also have a public newsletter that's free that goes out to everybody every Thursday, and we have since 2015. And the consumer interest and the consumer engagement is tremendous, where 10, 12 years ago, it didn't exist at all. And you guys are in the forefront of that, of taking it directly to the public. So I love that piece. That's my favorite piece. I don't see us getting to 160. And like we talked about earlier, I'm more interested in the health span than just adding another 50 years, where you're in a wheelchair and you're, not healthy at all, and you're costing the system a lot of money. So staying away from the chronic diseases, I think it's key right now for everybody who's on the planet, trying to make sure you don't get one of those. And if you do get one, on the functional medicine side, they reverse it. They can reverse diabetes. They can reverse just about anything that you get. You can reverse Alzheimer's, believe it or not, if you catch it early enough. So I'm very much into reversing chronic diseases. A little less pie in the sky. I told you I switched recently from going to just longevity conferences. I still go to some of those, but I was going to them exclusively for like 10 years. Mm-hmm. But now I'm a little bit more, because there's enough now that you can go. There are things that are available. I have so many things right here I'm looking at that's just sort of, cutting edge supplements, nutraceuticals, wearables, and then back to the basics. If people just made sure they had clean water through reverse osmosis, and if they made sure they had clean air, if they had, an air filter in their home, that would be half the battle. And if they didn't drink out of plastic, and they made sure that their cookware wasn't toxic, and the cleaning supplies were not toxic, and things that they're putting on their body are not toxic, we would be a lot healthier.
Is there anything that you would like to add before we wrap up here for the Live Long listeners and readers?
Well, I appreciate what you guys are doing. And it's great that finally that there's a group out there that is taking everything direct to the people, which is extremely important.
Yeah, it's our readership has grown pretty significantly this year, and it seems to be ramping up even quicker when we have discussions with people like yourself who are willing to share everything that you've learned. So thank you so much, Edwina Rogers, for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you.